have a rendezvous with death. We'll preserve the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.
No fear. No political correctness. No wokeism. You're listening to Underground USA.
Thanks for downloading, listening, and sharing. My name is Frank Salvato, and you can find all we do at undergroundusa.com. It might just be possible that you are as tired of hearing this bullshit as I am. Almost daily, it seems, we see items in the news that declare outgoing lame duck President Joe Biden is enacting this order or that initiative to hobble the agenda of the incoming Trump 2.0 administration. Evidently, one of two things is happening here. One, the mainstream media narrative crafters never showed up to or were always stoned for civics classes. Or two, the neo-Bolshevik spinners of the Clinton-Obama-Biden regime are working overtime to make the public believe something that simply isn't true. Where presidential executive orders are concerned, a lame duck president cannot enact executive orders that are inherently irreversible by an incoming president. Executive orders, directives from the POTUS, are legally binding but can be revoked, modified, or replaced by subsequent executive orders from a new president. This is because executive power resides in the office of the president, not in any individual president after they leave office. While a lame duck president can issue executive orders, these are subject to the same legal scrutiny and practical limitations as any other executive action. They can be challenged in court, and their implementation might very well depend on the cooperation of the federal agencies, which can shift with a new administration. Congress can also affect the longevity of executive orders by passing legislation that contradicts or nullifies them, subsequent to the president's veto power or lack thereof if there's enough support to override the veto. Historical examples show that new presidents often review and sometimes reverse executive orders of their predecessors. For example, Biden reversed almost all of President Trump's executive orders shortly after taking office. Trump did the same with Obama's. Through the federal rulemaking process, a president can influence regulations managed by federal agencies. However, these can be changed by subsequent administrations, though this might involve expediting the Administrative Procedures Act notice and comment period. This whole thing especially applies to one fear porn item floating around the usual suspect partisan media outlets. You know, the ones that are chock full of asinine clickbait articles and ads. The one in question reads,
President Joe Biden is reportedly preparing to restrict offshore oil and gas drilling in his final days in office, a move that would placate the environmentalist lobby and potentially obstruct President-elect Donald Trump's plans to unleash the U.S. energy sector. Biden's reportedly forthcoming order would permanently ban new lease sales for oil and gas drilling in certain regions of the outer continental shelf. Some elected Democrats and many well-funded Green groups have pushed Biden to implement permanent environmental policies in the waning days of his presidency to fluster Trump's energy dominance agenda.
So, when you read or hear bullshit like that, remember your civics class in understanding that all agencies, departments, and commissions in the federal government fall under the executive branch, and that the executive branch is under the control of the White House, not the other way around. That means when a president, with a working knowledge of the U.S. Constitution and an actual set of balls, and not transgender balls either, when one takes office, he is the ultimate executive authority, not the deep state bureaucracy of the agencies, departments, and commissions and the myriad assholes on K Street. It's important to remember this to fight the fear porn that's coming out of the mainstream media in the lead up to January 20th. When we come back, our segment on America's Third Watch, broadcast nationally from our flagship station WGUL AM 930 and FM 93.7 in Tampa, Florida.
You're listening to Underground USA. Farm says they're a good neighbor. But would a good neighbor target 5-year-olds for conversations about sexual identity? State Farm did. For 6 months, they asked employees to donate guides to being transgender to public schools. Books aimed at making kindergartners question their identity. How do parents know where State Farm put these books? What's State Farm doing about it? Visit AskStateFarmWhy.com.
News, insight, passion. AM 930, The Answer.
Well, Frank, it's a new year. So many people anticipating good things to happen, and I think generally we're going to see those good things happen. But unfortunately, New Year's Eve and early on New Year's Day was marred by the terrible attack in New Orleans. And it was someone who evidently, according to these reports, was completely inspired by ISIS to do what he did.
When I listened to the FBI agent who initially got on the air and shot her mouth off in front of the microphones, this wasn't a terror event. So what are you talking about?
Wow. Yeah, well, unfortunately, it seems like this person who had been in the military, served in the U.S. Army, U.S. Army Reserve, and then over the last, as I understand, about a year or so, became radicalized, professed his allegiance to ISIS, wanted to kill some family and friends, but then decided he needed, quote, a broader target. This is just madness.
Well, he certainly found that broader target.
Yeah.
And the fact that the authorities in New Orleans, and there's no other way to say this, weren't prepared for that is still kind of stunning, I have to be honest. But when you have a police chief who, by all accounts, and it's very hard to argue against this, was a DEI hire, unqualified to hold the job. She was a DEI hire in Oakland. She was dismissed. That's it. You're fired. You're out. Where nobody has any confidence in you, including the rank and file. And then New Orleans hires her. She didn't even know that the hydraulic barriers weren't. She didn't even know they were there. Number one, and number two, she didn't know that they were under maintenance and weren't scheduled to be active for New Year's Eve. These are barriers that activate along Bourbon Street for large-scale events that would have not allowed the truck to get through.
This is unconscionable.
Well, it's stupid. It's really piss-poor planning. You don't have events like New Year's Eve getting into a college bowl game in the march up to Mardi Gras and a Super Bowl without having those things in place and functioning properly. And you don't enter into that season because this is a busy season for New Orleans with all of this stuff going on. It's not like Bourbon Street isn't a target every single night.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But this is add all of this on top of it and to say, okay, well, we know we're going to have a New Year's Eve. It's a big deal. The streets will be crowded. And it's not like at midnight everybody goes home on New Year's Eve. People don't go home at midnight on Bourbon Street during the week on a regular day.
Right.
So not prepared. And to think that they keep awarding Super Bowls to New Orleans with these idiots in charge, that's kind of astounding.
No kidding. Well, you bring up such a good point, Frank, the idea of the DEI, conceptually, it's just obviously a bad idea. And we're seeing this bad idea, really become responsible ultimately for dropping the ball like this. It used to be, don't you want to have the most qualified police chief in charge? The most qualified security personnel, the most qualified anything. And DEI just seems to warp our entire society into pretending that we're doing the best that we can.
Yeah, and you saw two of them one DEI elected official and the mayor, who I'm sure is trying to do her best, but is so beyond her coverage in the kicking game here that you can't believe, and 2 DEI hires, and this is just point blank. If you read the Gateway Pundit, they had it up yesterday and verified. The FBI was throwing out things in the media calling for, if we're going to expand our diversity, equity, inclusion, you want to be an FBI agent? People will be shocked. The backgrounds that we're going to be hiring from. Come on down.
Wow.
And couple that with this police chief. Did anybody have any confidence during that press conference? They couldn't even figure out whether it was a terror attack. She refused to say it was a terror attack. Her bosses had to come back later in the day and correct her. But that was a special agent in charge.
Well, we were talking a little bit about, of course, what happened in New Orleans. We're getting more information, too, about what happened in Las Vegas. But, looking at that idea of radicalization of what happened with this person in New Orleans, this attacker, Frank, we've got a new administration coming in now 17 days. How do we be proactive now in order to try to head off the next attack? Is it a culture change at the FBI? Is it coming down from on high, or what has to happen? Because people are very concerned for good reason.
I think there'll be a lot more time for the intelligence and law enforcement communities at the federal level to be proactive in seeking out and understanding who might be the next quote-unquote bullet in the chamber, now that they don't have to deal with all this DEI BS.
Mm-hmm.
All of this bizarre stuff that the FBI and the intelligence community were tasked to do during the Biden administration started in the Obama administration for sure. But, we have to be worried about white supremacists. We have to be worried about the racism and the discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community within the FBI and then the intelligence community and those evil white heterosexuals. We can't have that. We must search them out. We're going over to a parent-teacher conference over at the middle school to make sure the parent doesn't say anything wrong because, hey, she's a terrorist. No.
Mm-hmm.
No. Maybe we can get back to some serious business in the intelligence and the law enforcement communities now, instead of this ridiculous garbage that we've been forced to deal with for the last 4 years. The FBI, boy, and I said this in the first administration when Trump came to office, there are some agencies, departments, and commissions that he must stop in on his way back from inauguration and say, thank you for your service. It's been swell. Pack your stuff and get out. And right now, the hierarchy and the upper management at the DOJ, if you're working there and you're in a position at those levels, you should be sweating bullets. And if you're in the State Department, the same thing should happen. Same thing should happen at the IRS. If you're Department of Education, you may have already put your resume out.
Yeah.
But this has got to stop. We have been so complacent as a people in allowing this deep state garbage to take our government and just hand it to special interests on a platter that we should be ashamed of ourselves. And right now, the idea that everything is going to be okay because Trump has been elected, and I said this ever since November, Kyle, you've heard it. It's a broken record.
Oh, yeah.
This is just a start. If you think it's going to be okay just because Trump won the election, you're not paying attention. You've got to keep the pressure on your elected officials to make sure that they follow the agenda that was mandated by the American people. You're starting to see the intra-fighting already in the Republican Party. We'll see what happens with Mike Johnson in his vote today. But this idea that, oh, Republicans are in charge, so now I'm a Republican on Capitol Hill sitting in Congress, and I'm the most important person now. Mr. Trump will have to work with me. We can't have that garbage anymore. For at least 12 years, we've got to be cohesive on the right side of the aisle to be able to reverse what's been done to this country through the Clinton years and the Obama years and the Biden years. Mm-hmm. And if we're gonna play this, we have to argue about everything because we're measuring appendages. Then we're stupid.
No, I hear you. Well, Frank, you were mentioning just a few moments ago about what the FBI, Department of Justice, has been up to. Going to the school board meetings or sort of going after all this DEI stuff and scrutinizing people, American citizens, basically. But what you were describing as you were talking right then, you're describing an agenda in and of itself. And that agenda seems to be directly against the sort of smooth operation, for lack of a better term, of the United States. And it actually goes against the traditional ways that we get things done, or how we make decisions, or how our Constitution even works. And it's kind of terrible to think, too, that, that's kind of designed to radically change the way our country works. And yet you've got other groups of people, like this person who attacked in New Orleans. They want to radically attack the United States. They don't like the way the United States functions either. I mean, this is something that hopefully we can withstand now that we do have a new administration coming in.
I love your hope for the new administration, but the same bureaucracy, the cogs in the machine are the same. It's just a different oil. Mm-hmm. So unless you're willing to actually stand up and take on the deep state bureaucracy, nothing will change. I don't care who's in the Oval Office. This is why I talk about cohesiveness and keeping the pressure on your elected officials. We've been faced with transformative neo-Marxism ever since Obama walked into Washington, D.C. So you've got 8 years there. It was prepped by the Clinton administration, but 8 years of Obama, 4 years of Biden. So 12 years of a full-throated neo-Marxist movement that culminated in the Biden administration, their FBI, their DOJ, is saying, you're not thinking right, so we're going to investigate you. Right. You're a parent, and that's what it was. You're a parent going to a school board meeting, and you're objecting because you won't just sit there and allow us to bring drag queens into your child's classroom and tell them that they don't know that you might be a little boy, you might be a woman trapped in a man's body. Yeah. And you don't have to tell your parents about it either. Let me talk to you about this ad nauseum until we brainwash you into thinking the way we want you to think. And when the parents object, the authorities come in at the federal level and say, you might be a domestic terrorist because you give a damn what's being taught to your child. That's neo-Marxist transformative thinking, saying you're not thinking correctly.
Yeah, thought crime. Where have we heard that before?
Now, you layer that on top of what radical, and people call it radical Islam. It's not radical Islam. It's devout Islam. If you are following the Quran to the letter and you are following the edicts of the Hadith, then you believe like these people do. A global caliphate must be established around the world that exists under Islam. That's it. And if you won't do it voluntarily, it has to be done by the sword. You're thinking wrong. Mm-hmm. That's where these two ideologies intersect. You're thinking wrong. And that doesn't work in a land where you're supposed to be free and free to be an individual. And that's where we're missing things here in the United States today. This conformity of, I've got to have everything that the other person has, or I deserve this because it makes me equal. We were founded on the idea of individualism.
Right.
Everybody is supposed to have that unique flavor about them. The Warrens aren't supposed to be exactly the same as the Salvados.
Right. Exactly.
You know, we're supposed to, you want true diversity? Leave people alone to be who they are. But our government today, you're thinking wrong. You think wrong on this. You don't believe in climate change? Yeah, we must castigate you. You think a certain way about this religion? Well, you're Islamophobic. You know, you think this way about the economy? Oh, well, my God, you're an anarchist. You know,
Right.
Have the discussions. We're not having any discussions today. The government says, here's the cookie cutter, fit in, or you're on the outside. And that's not the way we're supposed to be.
Exactly right. We had a great question earlier from a listener sent in a text to us. And by the way, folks, you can send us a text message as well. 949-942-5997 is our new texting line. It's been getting a lot of use, so we're very happy about that. Another cool way to contact the program. But Frank, one of our listeners wrote in and asked about what could be some of these preemptive pardons that Joe Biden could give out before leaving office. Now, whereas typically presidents pardon someone who's already been convicted, they may have served time or they may have completed their sentence or whatnot, but usually it's not for, maybe whatever it might, with the exception of Hunter Biden at this point. But isn't that another way that they're going to try to preemptively strike the idea that we can actually get the justice system to do what it's supposed to do, and as opposed to preemptively guarding all these different players against any kind of prosecution?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. What I see it as is a free ticket.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you might be facing prosecution, so I don't, I'm going to protect you because I'm the president and I have this unique ability. I'm going to give you something that's preemptive. Now, we have to be very careful about challenging the idea of presidential pardons, because that is something that it's in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's an absolute. Absolute.
It's an absolute. But it's the ability to pardon, and that has some inference to it. People who are innocent of things don't need a pardon. You don't just get something. It's like a letter of marque. Back in the days of the pirates, to be able to say, well, you're setting sail. Now, you haven't committed any piracy yet, but I want to give you this letter that says it's okay if you do. That's not what the pardoning thing is supposed to be. It's supposed to be for somebody who has been tried by a jury of their peers and convicted of the crime. Then the president, if you want to pardon them because you think that the judiciary got it wrong, that gives an extreme check and balance to the process where the judiciary is concerned. But you haven't really done anything wrong. You haven't even been indicted yet, but I want to give you this piece of paper because someone might think you did something wrong in the future,
mm-hmm.
so that you don't have to. We should challenge that idea. Just because the definition of what a presidential pardon is, in my opinion, and granted, it's going to take some legal scholars with an understanding of the law much farther beyond mine, I don't think that's what the definition constitutionally of a pardon is. To be able to give someone preemptive absolution for something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the challenge should come, is the definition of pardon. How does it apply? What is it? What are the prerequisites for pardon? I don't think you're going to see any of these discarded. That's for sure. I think we're going to have to eat it and smile.
No, exactly. No, but you're right, because of the way that the pardon works, and it's understood to be a presidential power to the executive. But there's a couple of things about this that concern me. Number one, they are trying to, again, sweep under the rug anything that has been going on that now is starting to be uncovered, especially with the Hunter Biden business associates. And we all know that, President Biden and even in his as vice president or whatever, did somehow interact with these people. He always said he hadn't. But what also it can set up is at the end of every presidential administration, you just pardon everybody who had anything to do with it, and that way you can just run roughshod over everything during your tenure and not worry about it because the president's going to pardon everybody preemptively. I think it sets up a really, I mean, that's an absurd kind of conclusion about it, but it seems like, again, they're trying to sidestep the justice system that they say they so believe in and try to uphold.
It's an abuse of power.
Yeah,
it's a blatant abuse of power. It would be something that normally a president would get impeached for. That's when you use impeachment. You don't use it as this political weapon because you don't like the way somebody combs their hair, or you don't like the fact that you lost an election, so you're going to hobble their agenda by attacking them and trying to remove them from office just because you don't like the fact you lost.
Mm-hmm.
Manufacturing things to impeach people over, the first impeachment was absolutely that. And depending on how you view January 6th and who was actually to blame, the second one could have been as well manufactured. So twice we saw Donald Trump being politically persecuted through the act of impeachment by irresponsible power junkies in Congress, in the Democrat Party. That this is something that even people going back as far as into the pre-Lincoln era with the impeachment process warned everybody about. Don't do it because of politics. It's got to be because of high crimes and misdemeanor. Well, abusing a presidential pardon authority is a high crime and misdemeanor because it can go against people's constitutional rights, and that's a high crime.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So when you're giving someone an advantage over everybody else, when you're giving someone an advantage over everybody else's constitutional right through a presidential pardon, that's what you have to look at. But like I said, you got to be very careful about how you deal with two branches of government ganging up against a third when you go to remove constitutional powers. And it really should be an effort of a constitutional amendment before you do that. Because to just create a law to do it means that you've put the legislative branch above the executive branch. To get a judgment from the judicial branch means you've put the judicial branch above the executive branch. This has to be done through the process that's been outlined in the Constitution that sees a check and a balance take place. And that would really need to come in a constitutional amendment to define, not redefine, but define what was meant by the framers,
mm-hmm.
not by Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell or anybody else, to define what the framers meant by pardon.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. Well, and just even in a broader sense too, in terms of the Trump administration, or I should say, the Justice Department, and even the FBI, but primarily the Justice Department, if they find stuff on Biden administration officials or other operatives, and it's all legit, the Democrats are already trying to set this thing up to where, anything, if they come out with anything, it's like, oh, this is all just about retribution. And then they'll say that that's an abuse of power. It's another example of they always put on to you what they're actually doing themselves.
Well, that's the modus operandi of the progressive,
mm-hmm.
of the neo-Marxist progressive, and that veneer is starting to flake off. People are starting to see that for what it is. So what has to happen is you have to say, okay, name calling be damned. You want to call it retribution, but here are the facts, and we're going to trial with it, and the jury will decide whether it's retribution or not. If it's retribution, the jury will acquit. If it's not retribution and a crime was committed here, they will convict. And you do that regardless of whether you're going to have someone say, but there's a presidential pardon in place. Okay, now let's talk about that. but get the conviction anyway. There's nothing that says you can't try the person, just means that, well, I've got a pardon, so you can't jail me. Okay? But we're going to get the conviction.
Yeah, and that will speak volumes. Because the American people have had it with all this stuff.
Well, you can't allow politics to stop what is right. You do it. The consequences may not be what you would like if a crime is committed, but get the conviction.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is often laced into illicit drugs and used to make fake versions of prescription pills. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it. Suppliers mix fentanyl into their products because it's potent and cheap, and the dealer might not even know. Keep yourself and others safe by knowing the real deal on fentanyl. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com.
You're listening to Underground USA.
If you like the podcast, please head on over to undergroundusa.com and subscribe for our Substack. Comes straight to your email inbox, circumventing the censors and the fact checkers, which is always a good thing if you're on the side of truth. And please consider becoming a paid subscriber. For the price of less than a quarter pounder with cheese once a month, you can support what we do. And believe me, we are a lot better for you than that quarter pounder with cheese. And lastly, be sure to discuss politics and current events, and even religion, with your family, friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. When we have these conversations, we understand that we have more in common than we do in difference. And that hobbles the dividers. It hobbles the deep state. It hobbles the people who do opportunistic government, and that's a great thing. You're listening to Underground USA. My name is Frank Salvato. No fear, no wokeism, no political correctness.